If everybody could put their phones on silent or airplane mode, that would be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's good.
Including me.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to 67 Pall. My name is James McKenna. I'm one of the directors of New Generation. It's fantastic to be doing this tasting live, face to face. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to everybody online that's joining us as well. Those of you that are online, just if you have a question, write it in the chat box and we'll be able to ask that question as and when in the tasting. So as I say, we're very pleased to welcome you all here and super excited to unveil the 2019s from Boekenhoutskloof today. New Generation, as a company, we're exceptionally proud of the portfolio that we import, and amongst that, Boekenhoutskloof is the pick of the bunch. We launched the 2018s last year and we're blown away by the reception that they got, both by the press and by our customer base. So we're hoping for the same this year with the 19s. Thank you to Marc for joining us from South Africa. He'll be flying back to South Africa after this tasting because he'll be pulling in the 2022 harvest very soon. And it's fantastic that you're joining us, Marc. We love working with the wines and hopefully they'll show well today. Marc is the technical director of Boekenhoutskloof and one of the key partners of New Generation. And then Tim Atkin, Master of Wine, of course, will be leading the conversation with Marc and taking us through those wines. Tim is instrumental in articulating the passion and energy and frankly the youth behind the new wave in South Africa. And I think as New Generation, but certainly as an industry, we really appreciate how in a very concise manner you can articulate the zeal that is driving the category forward. Enough from me. Enjoy the tasting and I'll hand over to the chaps.
Fantastic. Welcome everybody in the room. Hello to everybody watching online. I think of you as the upper circle really. We're in the stalls and we've got a fantastic tasting lined up today. Marc and I did this online last year and we're going to try very hard not to repeat stuff that we talked about last year, just in case anybody's heard the jokes before. And Val even yesterday sent me a note saying, don't mention adult world. Right. We'll find out about that later. We may just slip that in as a little aside because it's quite amusing, isn't it? Boekenhoutskloof. I thought I'd do a quick introduction really to the property, although Marc will talk about it more, and also a little bit to Marc. I mean, you've got his bio in the sheet, so I'm not going to go through everything he's done and where he got his winemaking degree and things like that, but a little bit about the property. The Boekenhoutskloof is an old place. It's an old property, 1776, and some of you here may be lucky enough to stay in that manor house, which is rather lovely. Tim Rance, the late Tim Rance, amazing Tim Rance, who set up Vinimark, bought it in 1993, and in 1994, Marc Kent arrived. And 1994, I think, was a significant date, not just because it was Marc's first job, apart from being a sommelier. He had been the world's worst sommelier for a brief time. 1994, obviously, was the year of the first democratic elections in South Africa. And I think in many ways, 94 could be seen, it's obviously a very significant date, but a very significant date for the wine industry too. I think of it as the beginning really of the new South Africa. And I think Boekenhoutskloof, even though it's an old property, in many ways epitomizes all that's good about the new South Africa in terms of its winemaking. And Marc is a key figure in that. When they bought the property, there were, I believe, 2 hectares of what, Colombin and Chenin Blanc, which Marc immediately pulled out, which was a mistake. Didn't you? And then he planted 4 hectares.
I planted 4 hectares, and over the next 5 years, planted up to about 20 hectares. And over the last 5 years, we've basically grubbed them all up. I did such a crap job, and replanted it to more sensible rights.
Well, and the first wine you made was in 1986, which was a Cabernet Sauvignon, which was from the block that you're still using to make the Franschhoek Cabernet we're going to have today. A lot of people associate Marc with Syrah, obviously, predominantly, but the 1990s, what's that? But the 1996 was your first wine, which was a Cabernet. And then 97 you made a Merlot, didn't you? Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, what's wrong with you in those days? I don't know what you're doing.
No, it's first out was in 96, just 8 tons of Cabernet from the same block of vineyard that we still work to, but still the base of our Franschhoek Cabernet. And that's on the south side of Le Motte, from a property called Heuvelsilk, the Malhabers. In fact, the same owners of the Eekhof where we get the 1902 Semillon from, just a different property.
Okay, yeah. So and you did. I mean, when was the first wine that you made from your own grapes? Would have been 97, and that was Merlot, wasn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So that was those are the grapes that you planted in 94 when you arrived.
Exactly, and now that's one of the varieties that in journeyman years lands up in the journeyman. That's what we use the Merlot for.
And then Porcupine Ridge, which is obviously a bigger volume brand. The first year of that was 97.
Yeah.
Again, when the first vintage of that amazing Syrah, which we'll come on to when we discuss the Syrah a little bit later. I think many of the things that people don't realise about Marc is how influential he's been in the South African wine industry, not just with Boekenhoutskloof and with Porcupine Ridge, but also with the Chocolate Block, which is an extremely successful brand, premium brand, with the Wolf Trap, with the Journeyman. He was also the founder of the Swartland Revolution. Swartland Revolution, I believe you described that as Woodstock, but without sex. Yeah? So the Swartland Revolution 2010 was your idea, you know. Porcelainberg, which we're not tasting today, but which is an epic wine. And we're going to taste a bit of Porcelainberg in the Syrah, as it were, because it's the base of the Boekenhoutskloof Syrah these days. As again, another thing that Marc was responsible for. You purchased it in 2009 and planted in 2010. Lots and lots of stuff that Marc has done, and we'll discuss a little bit more about his career when we come on to talking about the wines. But a hugely significant figure, not just as a winemaker, but also as a marketeer and as a visionary, I think, for the South African wine industry. One of the things I love about going to see Marc, and those of you who've been to the winery will know this, his tasting room is great. It's sort of a shrine in many ways to Liverpool Football Club. Tintin is in there, isn't he? But the significant thing I think about the tasting room is the wall of empty bottles at the back. Marc is a very great winemaker, and the reason for that, I think, in many ways, is because he knows what great wine tastes like. Marc drinks widely and often, and drinks very well. Yeah, and you always, when you're tasting with Marc, he talks about other wines from other countries. He's aware of what's going on in the rest of the world, and I think that feeds in to what he's doing. Marc is a sort of technical director now, and he's lucky enough to work with one of the great winemakers, another great winemaker from South Africa, who's obviously Gottfried Mocker. And we'll talk a little bit about Gottfried and what he's done when we're going through the tasting today. I thought what we do at the beginning, before we get into the wines, is talk a little bit about vintages. I think some people assume that South Africa, because it's a Mediterranean climate, broadly speaking, it's not in the Mediterranean, obviously, but it's classified as a Mediterranean climate, all vintages are the same. And there's been a real roller coaster over the last few years. Maybe we just talk to you a little bit about the great vintages. I mean, people talk about 2015, 2017. Would you agree that those are the two best of the 19? Wonderful, as we're about to find out too. Not really.
The one we're tasting today.
Yeah, one we're tasting. Yeah, I remember saying once to somebody in Bordeaux, Jean-Guillaume Prats, when the 2009 and the 2010 vintages were available in Bordeaux. And everyone was saying, which is better, the 9 or the 10? And I said to him, Jean-Guillaume, which is better, of Coste d'Estournel, because he was still there at the time, the 9 or the 10? And he said, they are both for sale. In other words, so he thought they were both great. Just tell us about 15 and 17, and then we'll talk a little bit about in more depth about 19.
Well, I think 15 is widely regarded as probably the best Cape vintage in 40 years. It was the vintage that I've made that we really celebrated, I think, was 05, probably 9, and then 15. I think 17 is a bit of a unique case because it's right in the middle of the drought vintages, and I think all we did better was cope with difficult conditions. So we went into 16 unprepared. Nobody had ever seen a vintage that was so dry. The berries were so small, it was warm. There were obviously no meaningful winter rains the year before. Very difficult. We normally need a little bit of rain in January, February to get us through the raison and increase the hang time. None of that came. And then 17 was pretty much the same. And I think people just adapted viticultural practices. I think there was better vineyard work. And I think rather than it being a great vintage, I think there were conditions that were difficult, but turned out to be fortuitous, and we just could cope with better. I think that's how I see 17. And 19, 18 was again very, very dry. And after the harvest, we had fantastic rains. The dams filled up for the first time in 3 years. And 19 for us is very much an elegant vintage. I think a lot of guys struggle. We have the benefit of obviously early, we can focus our attention on Syrah from the Swartland. That comes in early Feb. Cabernets in Franschhoek and Stellenbosch obviously noticeably later. But what came was some good rains mid-Feb, which really helped the Cabernets to ripen. And that's what I think a lot of guys had rot problems. I think there was a bit of a botrytis around it, but I think it's almost like one gets into a cycle or a habit, you know. So you get 16, it's hell of a dry, cut your spray programs in half. Those of you who are doing anything meaningful with the spraying. The same in 17, 18 repetition, and all of a sudden there's rain, and people have forgotten almost how to deal with rain.
Yeah, well, I think so. So you had these three extreme drought vintages, really. You know, 16, 17, 18. I mean, some of you may have done that drive. You know, when you drive towards Stellenbosch from Cape Town Airport, and you kind of turn left. Where Meerlust is, and Meerlust has a dam, and sometimes you drive past it and it was almost empty. You know, there was no water in the dam. And do you remember? You know, that there was talk even of Cape Town running out of water. You know, to drink, and people were rationing showers. You know, there were signs in the hotel saying only shower for 30 seconds. Not a problem for people like Greg Sherwood, obviously. No, sorry, Greg. I had to just. Hello, Greg's here, everybody. You'll hear from him later. He'll be talking to you online. Anyway, so 19, I think there's no getting away from it. Had its challenges as a vintage. I mean, one winemaker in Walker Bay, I won't give his name because he probably didn't want to be associated with the comment. He said that it was the only vintage in 20 years that had ever made him cry. It was tricky, you know. There were fires for a start in Elgin and also in the Walker Bay. It was wet, and depending on when the rain fell and how you dealt with it, and there was botrytis, as Marc's mentioned. Even in Cabernet Sauvignon in Stellenbosch, there was uneven ripening. It was the end of the drought, so it was low yields. But I think the key to it was partly when you picked, but also viticulture and sorting. And it's very interesting that another one of your great innovations, I think you were the first person to bring a sorting table to South Africa. When you were in a proper sorting table, is just supposed to somebody just pulling the leaves out of a bunches that arrived in a hopper.
I remember in the 80s when I just started getting interested in wine, late 80s, visiting Kurt Aman at Rosendal.
Yeah,
up in Jonkershoek, and Kurt had a very primitive kind of sorting table. But we brought in the first mechanized selection table into South Africa in 1997.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was always very important, and I think largely because of my shortcomings in viticulture, which are well celebrated. We try and do as much as we can in the cellar. Yeah, so it was one of those innovations. And later, actually developing the world prototype of the ViniClean, which was a sorting table out of the south of France from Socmar in Narbonne. And we developed this online with them because they had the advantage. They wanted to sell into France. So they developed this table at Boekenhoutskloof, and that was late in the 90s. Yeah, so it's always been quite important to us.
I think the whole point of this vintage really is that it's extremely good, providing the crop was healthy, right? So people who were good in the vineyards and did the sorting have made exceptional wines. And another winemaker, again, who will remain nameless, said to me, I'm still not quite sure how we did it, you know, what we did right and what we did wrong. But the wines have turned out, as you said, some really lovely, elegant reds, but also the whites. You know, I think some really good whites as well. And we're going to see one of those today. We are going to see 4 2019s and then an 18 at the end. Yeah. Okay. Anything else you wish to add about the vintage before we move on?
No, you mentioned fires. We also had fires in Franschhoek. We had not on the property, but quite close by in the Berg River Dam Bowl just behind us. And Journeyman had been a bit lean for a few vintages, and we really thought 19 could be a good.
You should maybe just tell people what Journeyman is, so that anybody who's not tasted that wine, because it doesn't often get exported, does it? You tend to see it mostly in the
well, we just make so little of it. In the early 2000s, we were saying, oh, Boekenhoutskloof made great wine, but they don't own any of the vineyards, and it was that kind of rhetoric going on, which is frankly unhelpful. But anyway, we decided let's try and make the best wine that we could from Boekenhoutskloof, and I tried a few times, but released the first one in 2005. In 2007 from the 2005 vintage, and it's a Cabernet Franc based wine with some Merlot Cab, and Journeyman's made only from grapes from the property, and we blended a Journeyman, but we thought there were hints of smoke taint.
Okay.
And then we had it analyzed, and they weren't. But we just sometimes these things only manifest in the bottle much later. So we canned it. So fires were a real issue for us too.
Yeah.
But because Boekenhoutskloof so late, everything else had come in when the fires came. It wasn't too.
It's interesting, isn't it? You started off with these 2 hectares of columbine and Shannon, which you pulled out, and you planted 4 hectares, and you're now at what, 150 or so?
Yeah, between the 5 properties, we've got about 150 hectares, but that's largely Cully and the Swartland with Porcelainberg and Gold Mine.
Yeah. So it's mostly Syrah.
Yeah, Boekenhoutskloof in its heyday got up to about 22 hectares. As I say, I did a really crap job, and Godfrey came along and has replanted basically everything by a few hectares of Cab Franc and a little bit of Merlot. Far more capable in the vineyard than I ever was.
Yeah. I think one other thing we should mention is your amazing new cellar, which is it is very James Bond villain-like, isn't it? That you kind of go down this tunnel and emerge underground into this incredible cellar. So, the first vintage you were in the cellar was 18, wasn't it?
Correct. Yeah. It's I've been privileged to have the opportunity to, I think, over the last 20 years, spend about 3 months each year abroad, and largely visiting other regions and other properties, and managed to kind of steal with my eyes and put our dream cellar together. And the only reason it took so long is that, this business, you don't start, and it takes a long time to be profitable and generate cash, and finally could do exactly what I wanted to do, and built this cellar, which it's really about.
It's full of toys, isn't it? I mean, it was unbelievable.
Well, I also need to keep Godfrey stimulated. There's always something new. And so it was the new cellar, and then there were a few amphora, and now we're looking at
Stockinger, food, or you've got everything in there.
Yeah, no, we've been.
And the racking, the way you rack the barrels is really interesting.
It's the Oxoline system. So that's something I've seen largely in France, and it's all about great barrel management. I think those old years of going into barrel cellars with all sorts of varieties of moss and shit on the walls and fungus and stuff, those are outdated today. It's about healthy wines need a healthy environment in which to do the élevage, and that was that investment really.
Yeah. Fantastic. Okay, well, I think it's probably time. You may have people watching at home may have started drinking already or tasting already, but we're going to kick off with the Semillon. And Semillon is an extremely historic grape in the Cape. I think people know this. It's quite possibly one of the first grapes that came in the mid-17th century. Interesting that Semillon in the 19th century was the most planted white grape in South Africa. It was also the most planted white grape in Argentina, believe it or not, and very, very widely planted in the New World. A significant amount of it in Chile too. Now it's about 1.1% of South Africa's vineyard area. South Africa has about 92,000 hectares, and Semillon is much, much smaller than Chenin Blanc, which is 18.6%, Sauvignon Blanc 10.7%, Chardonnay 7.2%. I don't want to blind you with numbers or bore you with numbers, but I think it's significant that Semillon, for the size of the plantings, makes a lot of noise, doesn't it? And I think a lot of South Africa's finest white wines are actually made from this grape variety. And it's particularly associated with Franschhoek. And I just kind of wonder why.
Well, I think, Franschhoek is kind of regarded as the home of Semillon in South Africa by virtue of these old plantings. And you spoke about when I arrived at the farm, there were these couple of hectares of Chenin and some Colombard. In the heyday, in the 1970s and 80s, for example, our local cooperative was harvesting 15,000 tons. When I arrived in Franschhoek in 1994, it was 2,000 tons. And of that, nearly half was Semillon. Yeah. And all of this was going to the large producer wholesalers. For our biggest bottled wine in South Africa in the 80s was a brand called Graça. It was styled on a vino bird in a kind of Portuguese style bottle. And the backbone.
Graça.
Graca. With
a cedillo.
Exactly. Yeah. And Graça, the base of Graça was Semillon.
Yeah. I mean, I think the idea was that Semillon was often cropped well, and was neutral.
It was the only reason.
Yeah, it was. But I mean, Semillon, and the reason why, obviously, it makes extremely good sweet wines is that it has a thin skin and it's sensitive to rot and to all sorts of other vineyard nasties, isn't it? Really? So you treat it well. I mean, this is amazing, this wine, and it comes from 3 old vine parcels, and not everything we're going to taste today comes from old vines, but this one really does, doesn't it? So 1902, 36, and 42, 3 parcels. Are they all of the same size?
No, they are actually on 3 completely different sites, and of different sizes. I was in trouble some years ago when I was speaking about the 1902 block. I said, the soils are only fit for potatoes, and it's sandy soils right next to the Franschhoek River on the Eekhof property. Then the block from the 40s is obviously the celebrated La Colline block, which is now every raider in the Cape Winelands, everybody who had a checkbook came and raided, and I think there were 5 or 6 guys making wines from La Colline at some stage. It's now 1 or 2 have fallen away. So La Colline's been important. And then the other block from the 30s is Heuvelsop, which is actually the same property where we buy a Cabernet.
And what's interesting about this, I mean, obviously Semillon's usually blended, particularly in Bordeaux, with Sauvignon Blanc, but here we've got a little bit of Muscat, and Muscat d'Alexandrie, you've got 3%. And you think 3% doesn't have a huge influence on the wine, but I think it does actually. I think in this wine, especially once you know it's there, it's much easier. But I definitely think that you can taste a little bit of what the Muscat brings. I don't know, I mean, otherwise you'd pull it out. So, well,
we did the obvious thing. For many years, we were blending Sauvignon Blanc, as they do in Bordeaux, as you alluded to. But Semillon is inherently very, very low in acidity. And at Boekenhoutskloof, we don't acidify any wine on us. So we needed that Sauvignon. And then it was 2014, we discovered this old block of Muscat in Franschhoek, in the southern appellations of Bordeaux. There's also Muscat planted. They used it for both dry and the sweet wines. And we found this old block and decided, let's use it. Let's replace the Sauvignon with the Muscat. But what we do, because Muscat is so fragrant and aromatic, Semillon relatively innocuous and gets its flavors with development and with some time in the bottle. We decided we picked the Muscat really early.
Okay.
It's whole bunch. It's fermented in amphora, and then
it's picked separately. Then is it?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's all done a whole bunch in amphora. And we pick it early, so we don't have those aromatics. So we've got nice racy acidity with no aromatics, and then we do the assemblage after about 13 months.
I mean, it's amazing when old vineyards all around the world, how often Muscat, there's a little bit of Muscat in the vineyard. I mean, there's a Pingus in Ribera del Duero last autumn, and even in Pingus, there are a couple of plants of Muscat, that people always just, old timers, field blends were what people did. They always put other things in there. It's very rare that people planted a single variety, in sort of neat lines. Really. So just tell us a little bit about the Semillon. So you're picking the Semillon after the Muscat, yeah?
Actually not. The Semillon, the one site, the old site comes in particularly early, and then La Colline's much cooler. It's a south-facing slope. But the Muscat kind of in between. But something also interesting from the Muscat, a part of the vineyard's on an overhead trellis. And this was because Muscat, a lot of it would have been for confit or jam production, for domestic use. So there's this nice overhead trellis with the adjoining vineyard, and this at 1902. So it's kind of picked in the middle. It's and then as I say, vinify. This is we vinify. Whole bunch in amphora and get this nice racy acidity.
Using your toys, right?
Yeah, well, Godfrey's toys.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I wanted to ask, just while we're talking about old vineyards, why is it that most of the vineyards that have survived are white wine vineyards? I mean, I think that a lot of Chenin, a lot of Semillon, not so many old vine red vineyards. Is that because of virus affecting red vineyards more, or why did the white vineyards survive?
I've really not considered it, but I think if you look at it, it's if you take proportionally what was planted in the period. So let's say in the early 20th century, the plantings of white were far more extensive than red. So I don't think we should look too much into that and say, hey, people have more readily pulled out red vineyards. I think it's representative of what was planted at the time. And largely these white, a lot of the old white vineyards would have been for rebate wine, for making brandy. Prolific bearing, high volume areas, irrigation areas, a lot of these old vineyards for production.
And a lot of these old vineyards are in out of the way areas as well, aren't they? I mean, not so much Franschhoek, but places up the west coast. I think in a lot of cases they were used for illegal distillation. People were making things in old pot stills and things like that, and some of these old vineyards survived. Really. Let's talk a little bit about the way you make the wine. So you're doing concrete eggs and a little bit of oak on it, but you're using larger oak only on this?
No, with the Semillon, it's just barrique. In the earlier vintages, it was 100% new barrique. In '97, built a little facility, a cold room, essentially dedicated for the production of the Semillon. So The wood components, all new, all Chateau Barrique from Bordeaux. And what we do is, because again, Semillon is so inherently so low in acidity, once alcoholic fermentation complete, we drop the temperature in the facility to about 5 degrees. And we leave it for a year. No batonnage, no sulfur. And we get this nice development in the bottle.
And I just wondered, do the concrete eggs affect pH in the wine at all? I often find wines that have been fermented or aged in eggs, I don't know whether it's to do with the convection or whatever, have a texture to them, and it's almost like a crunchiness. I don't know whether that's just me imagining it, but.
Well, there's certainly a richness if we take the same base wine and we do the élevage in inox or stainless, as opposed to concrete egg. Concrete egg, we definitely get a richness. You know, there is some interaction. Obviously, we treat the eggs with a very acidic solution to neutralize them almost before we use them, and each year they kind of get layered with tartrates. But we think that the thermal dynamic within the egg is really keeping the lees in suspension and giving that richness to the wines that it wouldn't otherwise have in say an inert vessel like stainless.
And at which point do you blend the two components?
Right at the end. So yeah, we typically I'm flying back tonight. Vintage is about to start next week. We're busy finishing off the bottlings of the 20s, and we'll start looking at one of the things is the assemblage of the 21 Semillon.
And the oak portion here is new wood, isn't it? It's 70% new barrels. I don't know about you guys or watching at home in the dress circle, I'm noticing that I don't feel this wine is marked by its oak. You can certainly taste it, but it's interesting the way Semillon seems to absorb the oak rather nicely. And that's partly Gottfried's winemaking brilliance as well.
Well, I think too that's a function of the temperature of the élevage. You know, wines more readily accept oak and take up oak at warmer temperatures. So as I mentioned to the primary reason is to inhibit mallow. We drop the temperature to about 5 degrees, and that also it makes the lactones and the vanillins and the oak a lot more integrated. The wine less readily takes up the wood profile at colder temperatures.
I mean, one last thing we should say about this wine is it does age really well. I've been lucky enough with you to taste some more vintages. I don't think we've ever done a vertical, but maybe next time. You never know. If I bring you something to do with Liverpool Football Club, I'll bring you a scarf or something, or a tinted.
Well, it's not likely to be a championship trophy this year. It was looking before Christmas, but not anymore.
But it does age really well, and it, you know, as it ages, it takes on those sort of toasty, waxy notes. It never goes sweet though, does it? I mean, as it ages.
No, I think it gets,
doesn't go honeyed.
Yeah, it gets more the kind of almondy profile. It doesn't get that kind of lifted sweetness as you talk of, but very waxy and lanolin. If I may, very Bordeaux-like almost.
Yeah, I think so. Good. Okay, let's move on. I hope we're on time, Val, more or less. Everybody happy at home? We're going to move on to wine number 2 now, and this is part of a pair of Cabernets, and this is the Stellenbosch Cabernet that we're going to taste first. Yeah, and this is interesting. This is based on. This is now the 6th vintage of this wine, and so it's not as old in the Boekenhoutskloof range as the Franschhoek one that we're going to see after that, but this comes predominantly from the Helderberg, and there's another parcel in what is known as the Polkadry Hills, yeah, although some people refer to it as Fora, don't they?
Yeah,
I think it depends. It depends on who you are.
Who you're talking to.
Right, yeah. But just tell us a little bit about the Helderberg, because the Helderberg is, I mean, South Africa, the Cape is full of beautiful mountains, and the Helderberg is a very significant mountain for Stellenbosch in particular, and depending on where you are in the mountain basically faces north, yeah, and it really separates Stellenbosch, and there are vineyards on the other side, but it separates Stellenbosch from the bay, yeah, from False Bay, and depending on how close you are, where you are on the Helderberg, it gets cooler. You could be growing Chardonnay as Uvamira do, and the Molyneux get grapes from there on the Fora end, or if you're at the other end where Waterkloof are and De Trafford are, it's much warmer. So just tell us a little bit about growing grapes on the Helderberg, maybe, and how it differs from the Simonsberg, which is the other famous Stellenbosch mountain.
Well, I think the Helderberg really is to Stellenbosch what the Medoc is to border. It's Cabernet country. And in the same year that we purchased Porcellainberg in 2009, we purchased the historic Helderberg winery, which has been making wine continuously since 1906. And we bought Helderberg primarily for our commercial brands, Porcupine Ridge, Wolf Trap, Chocolate Block, and some others. And our Franche Cabernet was essentially a single vineyard wine with a little bit of Cab Franc from our own vineyards. But it was always kind of sold out on release, and we thought now that we'd invested and were entrenched in Stellenbosch and in fact in the Helderberg, that it would be meaningful for us to start making a Stellenbosch Cabernet. So we did. For the first vintage was 2014, 4 sites on the Helderberg, and that changed over the years. What's happened is Scott Willem will forgive me, but he left Rupert and Rothschild and is now involved with the already immediately successful Tybosch operation. And these guys are, again, like they've done to Lakilin, these vineyard raiders coming with checkbooks, and Rusa saying, hey, it's over there, that's the vineyard, go.
That's Rosa Kruger.
Exactly, yeah. And so we became a little bit compromised, and that's why we lost one of the vineyards, and now we kind of also in the Polka Dry Fora area, but it adds an interesting dynamic to the blend.
Yeah.
But Helderberg for us, it's stylistically very, very different to our Franche Cabernet. And you know, there's great producers. The Riche is a stone's throw from our cellar there, and for me, the reference Cabernet. Yeah.
So I mean, I always think of Helderberg as making a slightly more powerful style than the Simonsberger, because it depends where you are.
Simonsberger a bit more plush, I think.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think so. A bit more rounded. Helderberg, I find the tannins quite different. Almost a bit more grippy. Yeah. And wine's definitely for aging.
I always think of the Helderberg as being a sort of the Pauillac of Stellenbosch. I mean, it's obviously a massive generalization. As I said, it is a big mountain, and depending on where you are, how high up you are, you know, you can be up at sort of 550 meters, really, if you're up where on that corner, a very windy corner facing the bay. And that's where Cordoba is, you know.
Exactly.
Which is where Cordoba is now Tybosch.
Yeah.
And if you've not had the chance to taste that wine, it's very special. That's kind of not really a Helderberg style, I'd say, wouldn't you?
I think it's more a Scott Willem style.
Yeah. Okay, now just tell us a little bit about how you make this wine in terms of pump overs, delistage, and I think also it's interesting the fermentation temperature you're using on this, how much you want to extract from that mountain, as it were.
Well, I think firstly, importantly, we spoke about selection. Everything that comes into the winery comes in a cold truck and it's left overnight. And just to be a little bit technical and a bit geeky, and we don't crush any berries anymore. So we destem and we try and get the berries as whole as we can into the winery. Godfrey's reined it in. I would normally have much warmer temperatures. You know, this goes up to 30. I was kind of always going even a bit higher, but 30 still considered warm.
Yeah. Get
nice extraction. All done in concrete. The whole Boekenhoutskloof fermentation cellar is Nicovello tulips. So yeah, it's a pretty basic regime. A couple of pump overs a day. I remember in my mid-20s when I straight out of wine school, I really believed that you had to get up at 2 a.m. to do a pump over. And then Godfrey joined in 2015 and said, "Wow, what's this all about?"
Well, he's never there before 9.
No. He's a bit more diligent than that, but he's certainly not going to hang around to come at 2 o'clock in the morning. You know, in those bad, difficult vintages when I was kind of using naughty stuff like sugar and burning the bags at night and nobody saw. And my mum was losing the vision. What's all those Hewlett sugar bags like? You know? So those are the kind of reasons you had to be up at 2 in the morning. And Godfrey says, "Mark, if we pump over at 8 or 9 tonight, do the last pump as we kind of cleaning up, it'll be fine tomorrow morning at 8, don't worry." So we're not kind of that fanatical as we once were. And I think all about the selection, the quality of the fruit, the peristaltic pumps, and now our great barrel cellar. It's really wines are much healthier.
Yeah.
I remember doing selection where I'd sort of some years 15-20% out because of the VAs and
stuff ups.
Well, yeah, just bad management. You know, you kind of like you think that because it's cold, wines can be left alone and nothing's going to happen. But there's obviously microbial activity. And I was always a bit maverick without sulfur for 18 months and first egg white finding only after 18 months. And Godfrey says, no, let's manage this properly. We've got the toys and let's be a bit more responsible, I think. We've kind of all grown up, I think. Yeah.
And Godfrey and you together have dropped the new oak on this. You used to be 100% on this, didn't you?
Yeah.
And you're now 75.
He changed everything.
Oh, did he? Well, what's the point of employing him otherwise?
He dropped the alcohols. he dropped the alcohols. He says, no, we don't need so much new wood. And he says, I'm going to say so many. I say, Godfrey, I'll make those decisions. But and I think the wine's all that much better for it. I mean, I've never been an analytical winemaker, and him with his training in Germany a little bit more analytical, but far from fanatical about it. But I think just really smarter. We smarter about how we handle the wines, and that's Godfrey's real discipline. Yeah. And I think it's a good trade-off between the two of us.
I think this is a very elegant wine. It bears up what you said about vintage. I think the people who got it right have made these sort of very fine wines. I mean, I don't think of that as a kind of classic Helderberg style in some ways. I mean, what is a classic Helderberg style? But it's not a blockbuster for me at all. It's not at all. I think it will age, but I'm not thinking, you need to wait at least 5 years before you can even approach it. I mean, it's pretty approachable now, I think.
Yeah, and that's good use of oak, quality oak. We only use Chateau for more than 20 years. I mean, I like to talk oak. Everybody sort of feels like they must apologize for it. I think investing in good oak is important, particularly with Cabernets, less so with Syrah. We'll turn about that later. But now having great conditions, and the most important thing is when we get to the selection table, when we taste those various parcels, there's such uniformity within the parcels, and that's the big difference. Yeah, just having really good conditions for the wines to add. I
mean, the one thing we haven't mentioned is there's 5% Cab Franc in this blend, isn't it? Just tell us where the Cab Franc comes from and what it does to the wine for you.
Well, again, no certification, which is uncommon in South Africa, becoming more common now. But Cab Franc just adds a nice sort of herbaceous notes, a nice freshness to the wine, and this is right next to Cordoba. You remember those great Cab Francs?
Yeah, on the corner.
That Chris made under his tenure.
Chris Keat.
At Cordoba, and from the vineyard right next door. And it just, again, adds a bit of life to the wine, a little bit of aromatic and some nice herbaceous notes.
Yeah. I think the structure in this wine has sort of softened over the last year, really. I mean, it was more structured, I think, maybe a year ago when I sit with you. I think it's sort of grown into itself.
Well, again, Godfrey's sort of tempered everything. I think alcohols have come down, and in my day, when alcohol needed to come down, we used the big black snake, the hose pipe, and Godfrey just sensibly picks earlier, which is the right thing to do.
Black snake. So I did a vintage in California once, and somebody said to me, I was sort of very naive, and they said, right, okay, here's a pump with water, or a hose basically, and they said, you see that bunch of grapes in the middle of that vat? He said, yeah, it's very dirty, just keep spraying it until I tell you to stop. Anyway, let's move on to the Franschhoek. Okay, here we go now, and this time we've got 10% Cab Franc here, right? Tell us a little bit about the source of the Franschhoek Cabernet, because we mentioned at the beginning, we said you've had it really right from the start, from 96, yeah?
Yeah, so if those of you who visited Franschhoek, if you look at the famous Lamotte property, it's just to the right. It's Hevelsa, and Francois Malherbe is the vineyard on there. The same guy, as I mentioned, we buy the Franschhoek Semillon from, and in 1996, I managed to secure 8 tons of Cabernet from Francois, and we're still working with that exact vineyard today. Although he's now he's planted more. There's more Cabernet from the same site. The old block is actually very virus infected, so we've grubbed most of that up. And then we're using Cab Franc from our own vineyards on Boekenhoutskloof.
Okay.
Importantly, it was something about Cabernet Franc on Boekenhoutskloof that really works. And an important detail here is the oaking regime. With Franschhoek, I always went 100% new wood.
And this is now 80, right?
About 80. Yeah, it depends on Godfrey. And again, I mean, it's 80 that lands up in the bottle. It could have changed. It just depends on the vintage. But so I was using, firstly, 100% new oak, and also a lot longer elevage. I was aging the wines for 27 months, and Godfrey's bought that right back. In fact, we're busy bottling this week the two Cabernets back at the winery. So
it's interesting, isn't it? I think because of this French influence, you know, in Franschhoek with the Huguenots and all those things, and the fact that sparkling wine's made there, people tend to think of Franschhoek as being a cool climate area. And it's not really. I mean, you're actually picking a week before Stellenbosch here, aren't you?
Well, to tell you that on Saturday, it was 42 degrees in Franschhoek, and yesterday and Sunday, 40 degrees.
Yeah.
It's not as cool as we
it's not.
Yeah, as we like to think. And where we are on the southeastern corner, it's just this bowl,
Yeah.
and it gets particularly hot.
Yeah, I think because of the French influence people or the French connection, people think, oh, it's a Pinot and Chardonnay area, and it's not.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about the way you make this. Do you make this in exactly the same way as you make the Stellenbosch cab?
Well, the big difference was the use of oak, and the time in oak. Stellenbosch was always we had less elevage. Now pretty much on the same track, but I think what you see in the Franschhoek is always in the finished wine a lot more austerity. The wine has the tannin profile is quite different. But where I find in a bit more power and plushness in the Helderberg one, there's definitely an austerity here. I think that the tannins are incredibly fine and really, really nice and dry.
It's leafier as well, I find. I mean, I don't know whether it's the Cab Franc bit, but it's definitely got that slight greenness to it, which I like.
But definitely it doesn't have the richness of the Helderberg. But I think you alluded to the aging potential. I think this is the one that really will age much better. But otherwise, the same regime. A couple of egg white finings. Vegan now, no egg white finings. Veggie coal. So we now use
veggie coal.
Veggie coal. We now use a potato-based product. I decided a year ago to change our whole winery to vegan. So from chocolate but wolf trap porcupine, no more eggs. It's all potato-based, and we're very, very happy with the results, I must say.
I'm just looking at the pHs on the two.
Yeah.
How do they differ? Are they always different? Or about the same?
To be honest, Tim, I never even look at the pH. We don't adjust it.
According to the tech sheets, they're exactly the same.
Yeah. So there we go.
But this seems more acidic, don't you think? This, I mean, I know the pH and acid.
I think because, as I mentioned, it's not as rich. It's definitely the wine. Yeah. The tannins are more different. The acidity is a bit more pronounced.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the pH is irrelevant for me. Whatever we analyze, we're not going to change it. So there it is. I mean, my 97 Syrah had a pH of 4.002, and everybody said that thing's going to last about 5 minutes. And 20 years later, it's 25 years later, still drinking absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, so, I mean, but you know, 3.79 is not high.
No, not at all. No, it's healthy.
I mean, talking of high pH, I think we should talk about that first vintage of Syrah, which had a pH of, it was the 1997, just over 4, right? I mean, it's kind of the wine that made your name, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think,
if I may say so.
Yeah, a lucky break again, and it's the only wine that I've ever made where every single berry that went into the winery landed up in the bottle. It was just cool, you know. It was gut feel. It was some whole bunch, a lot of stalk, no new oak. I mean.
Think about Rhone inspired, because you're a great lover of the Rhone.
Yeah, but think about it. Late 90s, the reference for Shiraz worldwide was what's coming out of South Australia. Everybody was using a lot of vanillines, a lot of new American oak, big alcoholic wines. This one, my 97 Syrah, because of virus, only had an alcohol just over 13, pH of over 4. Old barrique, some whole bunch, some stalks, which was at the time a bit reckless, to be honest, but it kind of worked out. And then
did you know you were being reckless when you made it?
Tim, I really didn't have a reference, to be honest. You know, I was never analytic, and I was never going to be. I wasn't smart enough to kind of understand chemistry. I didn't have a lab, and I kind of did what I read in the books. You know, I remember Parker's Rhone book and having traveled there, and just thought, this is what I'm going to try and do. Forget about what, you know, Peter was at Graham Becker was making some of the great Shiraz at the time, Hartenberg, these guys. I mean, Peter was banging it in new American oak, making these big bombs. And
Lamotte, I mean, Jacques Bourman was at Lamotte, wasn't he?
Yeah.
So who is Riemann Bourman's father, those of you who know his wines from Boekenhoutskloof.
Well, the only winery I ever worked in other than Boekenhoutskloof was at Lamotte. I did my stage, and Jacques, in fact, got me the job at Boekenhoutskloof, and I still am indebted to him. But remember, Jacques was using rotor tanks. Do you remember those things? Like rotor tanks and small wood and new wood for Shiraz. And yeah, I mean, his 85 was also one of the first ones he made. Was 85 actually, was a bit of a reference in its own right. And then there was Stalin's guys were doing interesting things. But yeah, I just tried to do something different. I was on my own, had absolutely no mentorship, and I thought, oh, here we go.
They just get on with it.
Yeah, and it was lucky. I mean,
bullseye first year.
Yeah, we got to be honest. Yeah.
And then, I mean, you know, we'll mention it briefly that fruit came from Somerset West, didn't it? Which is not known particularly as a famous vineyard area, especially for Syrah. And just tell us, you know, what sadly happened to the vineyard.
It became an adult world. No,
it's now under a car park. Outside us.
Yeah, it was on the into an industrial. You know, it was valuable land. And once we realized, way too late, the great wine we made.
How good it was.
Yeah, I went back and I actually picked some scraps in this building site, and I made it. It's quite a cool story. I managed to get a couple of tons of fruit lying around in the next year, which was 98, and I made this one. I got in there too late. The wine had an alcohol of 16.7, a residual sugar eventually stopped fermenting at 29 degrees, and I sold it to Walter Finlayson to use in one of his ports. So yeah, I'd taken home, and then I stupidly, you know, this shows you this vineyard was also completely screwed with virus. I did a whole lot of cuttings, planted them on, you know, grafted and planted in Boekenhoutskloof. And a couple of years later, I had this lovely red vineyard, just full of virus. Anyway, it was a complete circus. I tried my best. I thought this is easy. Let's propagate. Let's go. We're going to recreate, and it was just a complete joke, to be honest. Yeah. So that did put us on the map, and then we.
And when did you after that? Where did the grapes come from? Because this is now all.
It's all
Swartland, isn't it? So when did it become all Swartland?
In 2015, we from 1998, I'd met Groot Skalk, not like his son Small Skalk, but Big Skalk Burger in Wellington, and all that.
They're all enormous.
The fruit was coming from the Wellington site, and then realized that was coming to end. We bought Porcelainberg in 2009, and from 2010 started kind of weaning ourselves off Wellington, and in 2015 had the first wine of origin Swartland. So
yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, the Porcelainberg site, there were some old vines on it.
Yeah.
I think even probably the first few columellas, the Syrah came from there, that little bit down near the wind turbine, the windmill. Rather,
the wind pump.
But you pretty much planted the whole place, didn't you?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I mean, I was driving towards Malmesbury with Rudiger Gretschel, Reinicke, and a few other things that Rudiger does, and
German Namibian.
Yeah, and Rudiger and I were driving to our big grower in the Swartland. We bought a couple 100 tons, and he said, "There's the Porcelainberg," and I remember kind of the name, and he said that's where Evan and Adi are buying fruit. Adi's first wines, also he was buying a bit of fruit there, and then Neil Beckett had written a piece on the finest Syrah he tasted in South Africa on a trip. It was called Schonenberg, which was actually the name of the Porcelainberg site. Anyway, and then Rudiger and I landed up there one day and managed to buy some fruit. And then the guy was in such a mess that he agreed to sell us the property. And then we realized that I'd done such a crap job. And seriously, we were so exposed because all our best vineyards were coming from other people's vineyards. And we were in a different position financially. So we decided it was time to start acquiring vineyards. So we bought Porcelainberg in 2014, gold mine. And as you say, today we've got about 140 hectares of vineyards in the Swartland that Cully Lowe has planted almost single-handedly.
I mean, Rosa Kruger, who many of you will know or know of, who's a viticulturist really, and a kind of an old vine guru in many ways. She describes Porcelainberg as a brutal site, and it is a kind of brutal site, isn't it? That it's, I mean, it really is. It's I think one of the great vineyards, not just of South Africa, but of the world. But it's pretty hard to grow grapes there, isn't it? I mean, it really is. Well, just to get the things in the ground, right? I mean,
yeah, we had to really, particularly close to the cellar and where it lives, and I'll have it on record. I don't want to live there. I don't know how Kelly lives there. I mean, honestly,
he's a special person.
No, it was 42 degrees in Franschhoek on Saturday, Kelly would have had high 40s. I mean, that's just not fun. You know?
Yeah.
This may be shit weather, but
Yeah.
I don't want to be in 49 either, you know, for sure. And next to his house, he's got these old schist, these banks of slate, and we use a D9 with a deep tooth just to rip it. Other than blasting, there's really not much else we can do.
And describe the soils in a bit more detail, because they're very different from gold mine, because 10% of this is gold mine, which is close to where the Molyneuxs are.
We're all right next door. We border their roundstone probably. And you know, you talk to Kelly, and again, as I'm not a viticulturist, I'm certainly no soil scientist, but Kelly's got a very bluish kind of schist. You know, there's layers.
You can actually see the colour, can't you?
Exactly. And these iron pyrites, almost like fool's gold. And I think that's where the porcelain, that's why it was called the Porcelainberg, because of this mica and schist. And then obviously going into the valley floors, just over time decomposed, there's more soil to work with, so to speak.
Yeah.
And in gold mine, there's very much this brown kind of schist, you know, and a bit cooler, again on a very, very steep slope. And quite different to profiles. With Porcelainberg, we tend to get this very, if you're familiar with Kelly's wines, this blue brightness of fruit, and almost I think of some of the Syrahs down there near Pix and Loop. You sometimes get that very blueberry, blackberry kind of bright, and that's what I think Kelly gets, and obviously with absolutely no oak, élevage in a combination of concrete and in food from Starkinger, he preserves all of that. With gold mine, I think we get a little bit more power and a bit more spice and aromatic and more plummy kind of Syrah flavor.
I mean, you planted Porcelainberg in 2010. When did you plant gold mine?
Well, we couldn't plant the 90 hectares in a year.
Yeah.
We planted it over the course of a few years. And gold mine, I think it was 2014. We purchased and we finished up planting 2 years ago, up to about 140 hectares, largely Syrah. I thought we were planting only Syrah. And then I arrived and I see there's some Grenache. And Kelly decided to put in a bit of Simcoe. He's just uncontrollable, you know. And honestly, you know, personalities like you can't tell him he can't do something, because then he will do it. It's like I was back in South Africa a week ago, about 10 days ago, to do the assemblage, the blending of the 21 Porcelainberg. You know, he only rears the wines for about a year. And we go there, and I almost feel like I've been set up with Kelly. You know, the wines are all there. It's almost like he's already decided what's going on. And once we've done the blending, we've eaten a big obligatory piece of, and he explains how he shot that, and Ryan cut it up. Ryan Boone, the butcher.
Shot it. I thought he was strangled.
And then so you eat the steak and you finish the wine, and then a couple of months later it's in a bottle, and you wonder if that's actually the wine you blended. And who's actually going to question Kelly? What are you going to say, Kelly? You're bullshitting me. You know, so I mean, he I guess he also knows how to work, because it's quite.
I took a photograph of him with a gun, and I thought, you know, that's obviously why I gave him 100 points, because I thought he was going to shoot. He's got a character, isn't he?
Godfrey, as we speak, Godfrey's actually taking some friends of mine, viticulturists from Portugal, out there today, and he said, Godfrey, Kelly said to me, do you think the guy will want to shoot? What do you want to shoot? No, clay pigeons. So, I don't know. There's always something going on. But there's absolutely no doubt. Kelly is very, very capable in the vineyard. He does an amazing job. And he's
a farmer.
Yeah. Well, he's more than that. I think he's
a great winemaker.
He's a vineyard. Yeah.
But he really is a farmer.
Yeah, he's a complete
you could see,
article.
look at his hands, you know.
Yeah, I remember in those early days, you know,
and he was a TMB as well, wasn't
he? Yeah, and he refused to have a smartphone until very recently. You know, he wanted a Nokia 2110 or some shit like that. I used to phone him on a Saturday, and there was Kings of Leon. I said, "What you doing, chilling?" And he said, "No, I'm in the track. I've got a CD player and I'm listening to some Kings of Leon, working on the weekends." And he's one of those guys. He never says, "Well, I'm going to work the weekends." He just kind of gets on with it. He does what's right, you know. An incredible farm, and we get this beautiful fruit coming. I mean, we didn't buy Porcelainberg or Gold Mine to make Porcelainberg. We bought them primarily for the chocolate block, and obviously for Boekenhoutskloof Syrah.
And then you realized how good it was.
Well, we thought we should preserve it, and we also, you know, Kelly also wanted to make some wine.
Yeah.
You know, and this has been his kind of way, and yeah, just giving us such beautiful fruit to work with.
And this is 90 Porcelainberg.
Yeah.
And 10 gold mine. Is it always that?
No, it's shifted, and I suspect We have to be very careful. While his vinification and his élevage is quite different to Boekenhoutskloof, we also don't want two wines that are looking too similar. You know, with Porcelainberg, there's never any reference to Boekenhoutskloof on the label. We try and keep it as its own thing. But importantly, you know, you can't have two site-specific wines from the same site. So the gold mine's in there. We do different cellar treatments and handling. We pick obviously a bit later than Kelly, but we don't want them too similar. So that gold mine proportions there also. But this is the least gold mine ever. You know, undoubtedly Porcelainberg's the preferred site. Well, for what we're looking for, gold mine may work better for something else. But we, in 15, I think it was about 60-40, and now at 90-10.
90-10. I mean, Callie's wine style, I mean, changed quite dramatically in 2018. He went to visit the Jamets in Côte and came back and decided he wanted to use submerged cap, you know, so basically to keep the cap wet all of the time.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, he thinks that made a significant change to the style of Porcelainberg, and I agree.
I agree.
Are you using the same technique yourselves?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
You know, Godfrey would hate to admit it that he has to learn something from Kelly, but no, we are. We are. But remembering that Kelly's got 3 or 4 fermenters, we've got 24 at Boekenhoutskloof, so we're not going in and everything's now got a wooden header board and a submerged cap. Yeah. We using it. And Kelly is also 100% whole bunch.
Yeah.
You know,
and you're 60 on this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well. That's what lands up in the bottle eventually. Yeah. And again, with us, it's all no new barrique for more than 10 years now. It's all in Stockinger, 2,500 litre food run.
And demi-muit as well. Use that 600.
The gold mine component is always in demi-muit, these 600s, and that was I remember on a few occasions visiting Clap, and that's something that they use. Also from Stockinger, these 600 litre demi-muit, and it's been good for us. And I think just a point of differentiation, you know, just to have another blending component, another site, different size of oak and different variable on the blending table.
Can you maybe just talk a little bit about Syrahs from the eastern side of the Swartland over here and the western side over where Ardie and Devon are they very different in style? I mean, there's more granite that side, isn't there?
Yeah, and also the water is quite different. You know, we've got very, very brackish water. Their water tables are different. The aspects are different, and it's not as extreme. Okay. So we're in our Pallskloof and Siebertskloof, where Ardie and Eben are.
Part of that side.
Yeah, it's way less exposed. Kelly is the epitome of harshness.
Yeah.
Brutal. It's brutal. Like his wedge of steak, it's brutal. Yeah. No, jokes aside, I mean, they're very, very different. I mean, I think, again, it's almost as if Syrah, that certainly on Ardie's property, you're getting a bit more of that plummy spiciness, where not that blue vibrancy in the fruit and the kind of acidity, that's the purity that we're getting on Porcelainberg. I think that's really the big difference.
I mean, just to finish with Syrah, I think Syrah is such an exciting variety in South Africa, in that the styles are so different. There are so many different regional styles, more so than with Cabernet. I mean, Cabernet tends to be, you know, pretty Stellenbosch focused at the top end, doesn't it, with a few exceptions. Whereas Syrah, there are great Syrahs all over the country.
Well, and I think again here, just to a bit of cellar talk. I mean, Cabernet is always supported by good oak, whereas the best Syrahs in South Africa, nobody touches new oak anymore. You know, everybody's gone over that super wooding and vanillines and new oak and shit, and everybody's using older wood and larger formats. And it's about preservation, and that's of the kind of integrity of the varietal. I mean, you think of Reinica and some of those cool Syrahs near where Rhiannon is. You know,
in the Polka Drive, really. Yeah.
Exactly. A lot of pepper, and that's definitely to do with a cooler site, picking a little bit differently, a bit earlier. So yeah, there's so many nice examples of but yet so different.
And I think it's significant how young the vines are on this wine. That's true. Most of the Syrahs, there are not many old vineyards of Syrah. I mean,
no, and also interestingly, what we have seen is some of the, as viticulture in South Africa has become more advanced, we've taken more care, we've learned a lot more. inevitably a lot of the top Syrahs are the South African clone, SH1. We bought in stuff from France, we bought in stuff from Argentina, prolific bearer, 49, SH99 in France, but the SH1 and the cleaned up 1A are the basis of all of these wines. What's interesting is how they show with the same clone such differences because of the size.
Okay, yeah.
I think it's
So it's a sort of a transparent clone. In a
exactly,
sense,
yeah.
Really interesting. Okay, so we're going to finish now with the sweet wine, which has just dropped into your glass. And this is an old block on the farm, comparatively old block, isn't it? Of nearly a hectare. And you've now added, so successful, is it another 1.4 hectares?
Yeah, we've added another 2 blocks
Yeah.
to it. It's been a huge success for us. I planted it because it kind of, the site said, high water table, next to the Franschhoek River, not a river by Europeans, you know, it's more.
It's not the Rhone, is it?
No, exactly. It's more like a stream. You know? Yeah, it's more, yeah, exactly like a creek. And good years when we have a lot of rain, we manage to collect 1 or 2 little brownies, some trout out of the river, but further than that, there's not enough water for those brownies. So tiny little stream, high water table, and surrounded by trees and really, really high humidity. So it always seems to me this would be a great site for making sweet wine. And we get amazing botrytis.
So when was this vineyard planted then?
Late 90s.
Okay.
Yeah. Late 90s, one of the first.
And it was planted to make this wine.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. We planted Semillon, and it was never going to be a dry wine. Obviously, with the old vines, I'm not going to say abundance of old vines, but we had access to old vines. There was no reason to plant Semillon there, other than for sweet wine. And it's been as I say, a huge success.
Can you just tell us what the residual sugar is? Does it say on there? It does, doesn't it? 135. Okay.
Yeah, so it's the first one I made was, I'm trying to think what vintage. I think it was 2001. It was like a Takai.
Yeah.
It had like 400 and something grams of sugar with 7.5% residual. It was a complete cocker. I picked it.
Just stopped fermenting.
Well, it had to.
Yeah. No choice, right?
Yeah. With those kind of analysis, I had to stop saying that. I think VA was through the roof. I completely cocked it up. I had no idea what I was doing. It just seemed like a good idea. And made the first vintage, and as I said, it was more like a TBA or Takai in its makeup. And then I asked AB Bierkus. AB made great sweet wines at Leafland to come and help me in 2002. Yeah, I really cocked it up in 01. And 02 I said, AB, come and give me a hand here. And he wrote, you might have never seen botrytis wines. And I did the whole thing. You know, it's up to 3 years, 100% new wood. The vineyard's small, it's only about 2 acres. And so
I think you've moved towards more of a Barsac style, you know, that sort of lighter,
exactly. So
more kind of lemon meringue.
Sensibly, yeah. You know, Godfrey was smart enough to use a belling meter, way smarter than me. We pick it more sensibly. We're now picking in April rather than late May. And you must consider we're about to start harvesting. So for us to be picking in May, it's a long harvest, but also everything else is barreled down, and it's actually kind of fun to then get the winery going again, so to speak, and to make this wine. And it's never going to be huge production, but we actually think we do a pretty tidy job. We're using good toasting on 100% new wood. We're working with a barrel that they use extensively in Citron, but it's now typically the RSs are 140 to 160, kind of benchmark.
Just a couple of other questions before we finish, because I know that there will be questions from the floor and online. Is just, do you get botrytis every year, and is it 100% botrytis? And just how the other question would be about VA. You know, how worried? I mean, I think the VA in here is not noticeable at all. Just how worried are you about VA in sweet wines? Because some people are very relaxed about it, and others are like,
Well, I think VA elevates the wine in the early stage. The problem is it falls to pieces later on. And we had the earlier ones had a lot more VA. And that was one thing, bird damage. So birds and baboons, but baboons take the whole bunch. Birds just damage them.
And if they damage it, then you break the skin, obviously.
Exactly.
And then you get acetic bacteria.
Acetobacter, yeah. So what we've done is nets. So we use nets now to keep the birds away. 2 harvests ago, we were busy harvesting, and there was a boomslang, a tree snake, the most venomous snake in
you don't mess with those, do you?
Well, no, you don't.
Even Callie would step back on one of those.
he was caught. this guy was caught in the net, in the net, and they're back fangs, so it's very difficult for them to bite you, but they are the most venomous. But yeah, so the nets have made a huge difference, and again, just Godfrey and better, cleaner winemaking, healthier wines, essentially. But 17, you spoke about 17, the drier ones. This is the 18. We always release a sweet one a year later because of the longer.
So I should have.
Yeah. So 18 was a dry year. So the botrytis wasn't as prolific as we'd like to. So we did multiple trees. And we did try a little bit of atomizing with water, just to take a bit of spore and in kind of a lukewarm water and then atomize it into the bunches. It wasn't hugely successful, but we did quite a few trees for this, a few selections in the vineyard. But the botrytis wasn't as prolific as we would have liked.
Yeah, fantastic, good. Well, those are the 5 wines. Val has a question.
So we've got a question from the online audience here about when's the sort of best time to drink the sweet wine. So drinking well now, but will it age?
Absolutely. I think there's enough here. There's enough firmness of acidity. I think there's a freshness. I wouldn't leave them too long. I think the newer wines, Godfrey's wines, are way better. I think the ones that I was making in the early 2000s, a lot looser, more lifted VAs. Yeah. When a wine starts off with a relatively high VA, it's
more exotic, weren't they?
Yeah. But I think it's certainly they've got certainly ageability.
And is there any plans to put your reds into Magnum or larger format?
We get that question regularly, and I've resisted the temptation to do it, and I probably need to compromise the decision. Is I've decided we only bottled the wines for auction, for charities. I always thought, let's keep Boekenhoutskloof. If they're large format, it's for charities, to give away. But there's so much pressure from the market. Seemingly, more and more people want magnums. It's a bit like Cali. I arrived there and there were all of a sudden 3 liters of porcelain, but it was never my strategy.
Another thing you've done.
It was never my strategy, but Cali. And I saw a picture of somebody I imported in Japan. It was a 3 liter. I think, Cali, where did this come from? Did he decant it? We're definitely gonna need to do that.
Any more questions from the online audience?
No? Not right now.
Any comments or questions from the floor? I think we'd love to hear from you. That we've been jaw-jawing for an hour or so, and if anybody would like to comment on the wines or ask a question to Marc, then please go ahead. Now's your moment.
Yeah.
Are you guys experimenting with Echellas planting at Pall with the Syrah in particular?
Vine
so
by post?
the question for the online audience was: are you guys experimenting with Echellas plantings? That's the single stake. Yeah, no, don't worry, I'm just saying so they can hear it. Gold mine or Porcelainberg.
Porcelainberg's in fact got a few hectares that we've experimented with. I'm not sure we've been hugely successful because the site is so exposed. And Syrah is generally very, very forgiving in the vineyard, as it is in the cellar. But the one thing it's prone to is wind damage. And because the site's so exposed.
There's no shortage of wind.
Exactly. And it's like when Kelly planted on the most exposed sites. We've got one particularly big block, and then the one next to his house. So we have experimented. I'm not sure it's been a great success. I think aesthetically people say, wow, I saw that in Cockroach, or whatever, and I don't think it's made much sense for us, frankly.
Well, why do they use it in the Rhone? Is it against erosion? Is it space? I don't know historically why they use this.
Well, I suspect it is space. I mean, if you walk those sites, I mean, when they carve out those terraces, I mean, there can be a little terrace and there's 3 or 4 vines on it. You would never have it on a VSP. It was a logical
or a bush vine or whatever.
Yeah, no, not bush vines. They're too exposed.
Interesting. Good question. Any other questions? Silence.
So you mentioned about the nets to keep the birds away from the Semillon ones. How do you keep the baboons out?
Just a question. Their question for the online audience was: how do you keep the baboons out? Not just the I've got a good baboon story in a minute. Not just the birds, but the baboons. Well, it's a Cali related story.
No, but
they're all Cali related stories.
What's the shotgun?
Yeah, how does it? I'll tell you the story in a minute.
Yeah, but don't ask. Yeah. how we deal with them at Boekenhoutskloof and how Kelly deals with them are very different. So we literally have somebody who chases the baboons away. So typically late March, as on the mountains, Boekenhoutskloof, we've been farming on our own property for 15 years now organically. What's come back is the wildlife, the leopardback lynx. There's a lot of lynx and a lot of baboons, and normally they come down as the fruit's getting riper. They're looking for things to eat. But so we literally in the daylight hours we have people chasing. We tried the gas cannons, but they don't care. We've used rubber snakes. One thing a baboon is hell of a scared of is a snake. They don't like snakes. So we put rubber snakes, but they come a bit close and they're working out that the snake's not moving. And that snake was there yesterday. And he was in the same position. Yeah, so we literally have guys who sit there and they're big porcupine ridge umbrella and chase the baboons away. Yeah, that's the only way to deal with it.
So the Kelly story is when before he went to Boxleyburg, he was at Toolback Mountain Vineyard. So he followed the Molyneux to Toolback Mountain Vineyard and had a baboon problem. And he said, so basically they put an electrified fence at the top end of the vineyard so the baboons couldn't get through it. And the baboons are smart. So the baboons, what they did was they would actually they would take a branch from a tree, put it against the electrified fence, and then run up the branch and leap over the fence into the vineyard and eat. I don't know how they got out, but anyway. So he thought, right, bastards. So he bought some lion dung from Cape Town Zoo and put it around the edge of the property, thinking they'd smell the lions and think, oh shit, not going there. Anyway. For a while they stayed off, and then they thought, oh, there were no lions, it's just lion shit. Anyway, so they started coming back into the vineyard again. And then he thought, right, bastards. So he basically thought, I'm going to shoot one of them. So he shot one of them and draped its body over the fence, right? So that they would see, pour encourager les autres, realize that basically that will happen to you. And that kept them out. And anyway, then I was in the vineyard with him, and this baboon was hanging over the thing, and the baboons were sitting up on a hill above it, throwing rocks at Kelly. So in the vineyard, with these stones coming out from the baboons. And baboons are the thing where they show you their arse, don't they, basically? So the baboons, that's what they thought. I think everybody gave up. Or shot another one. I don't know what it is.
No, but I mean, I've got a very sad story. You know,
oh God, we weren't going to talk about adult world. We've done adult world, and now we're talking about baboons' asses. I'm really sorry, but the people of a delicate disposition online at home having breakfast.
But I won't forget it, because I think it's the only people I've ever received who they were Pacific Islanders from Tonga. Some guests for a tasting, and the tasting looks down towards the river over the semi-island, and we've got our transformer for our power that comes to the property. And I was sitting to this tasting, and the baboons were in the vineyard, and this one guy bolted up the thing. I've got a Wolfie and a Great Dane, two big dogs, and they went after the baboons. And this one guy goes up the left, he touched two power cables before it came to our transformer. So he cut the whole power to the bullhook, and this guy was literally just ash, And these poor guys sitting there, we're all watching the dogs and the baboons, and we all see this guy going. No, it's terrible. It's not. They are a menace, but
don't tell Kelly.
No. But but we have to remember that they were there a long time before us. So we give up our share. The problem with the baboons is not the fruit they steal; it's just the damage they do to the permanent framework of the Nile.
And on that uplifting moment, if there are any other questions, Pal, one more.
Yeah, so just one more from online. Is there scope to increase the production of the whites, so the Semillon specifically?
We try, but the old vines are difficult. As I say, guys have come in and kind of raided sites that we typically been working with. They aren't. The problem is, firstly, it's one of origin frontage, it's going to remain that way, and then the limited amount of old vine. Should we get access to more old vine fruit, we certainly would like to try. I mean, it has grown, luckily.
But they're not making any more. That's the problem, are they? Of old vine fruit.
No, sadly, and we're not going to stick around for 100 years to wait for the vines to age. So no, it's always going to be limited, but it has grown because Lucaline was a relatively new palm for us, and we've been working for about 10 years.
Okay.
Any other questions in the room? Victoria Mason.
It might not be the right question for Marc with his difficult relationship with viticulture, but I just wanted to ask We talked about a lot of work, a lot of changes that have been made in the vineyard. And if you look at the two Cabernets, but both of them are close to 15% alcohol, though incredibly balanced. And I just wondered what work or what adaptation you're starting to make in the vineyard to control kind of the accumulation of sugars, alcohol, and how you're matching that then with the right process.
Yeah, to give you an example, Godfrey, we chat almost daily, was in vineyards this week, and he said, somebody had been already leaf plucking. So and then the heat came this weekend, so everything's now sunburned. So we've adapted, but it's a two-pronged question. One's about the alcohol, and as Boekenhoutskloof, we made a decision some years ago. I thought I was getting it all wrong. Everybody's alcohols were becoming lower, and I mean, Godfrey has tamed things somewhat. I mean, I had a few wines at around 15. So it's good viticultural practices, trying to maintain more foliage and a healthier canopy. I think that's a big point. And obviously Rosa's impacts, the impact, Rosa has been incredibly helpful with us, with our sites. But, we must say that 19 was a relatively elegant vintage. And we had enough, there was enough water to leave them longer to ripen. But I think it's just good practices, good cover crops, but most importantly about exposure during the canopy. So leaf plucking at the right time, because we want them to hang longer on the vines without becoming faulty.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
Sorry, apart from baboons, obviously, what do you think is going to be your biggest challenge or challenges in the next few years?
Can everyone hear that question? If not, you can't write back. But anyway, what are your biggest challenges over the next few years, apart from baboons?
I think water.
Yeah.
Water, and no different to any other region globally. I think water is going to be the scarcest resource for all of us. Yeah, going to be managing water and warming. The sites. Planting in newer and cooler sites is going to be imperative to having a sustainable business going forward.
Thank you. Good question. I think that's it. Are we on time? Just about?
Yeah, fine. Good for
Look at that,
time.
bang
Yeah.
on time. Right, there we go. 4 minutes late. Thank you everybody for excellent questions, for your attention. Hope you enjoyed the wines as much as I did. I thought they were a really good lineup, and I thought they all showed extremely well. I was very happy with my notes and scores. Good. That's always a relief, isn't it? There we go. Thanks everybody. Thank you, Val, for organising, and the whole team at New Gen. Thanks to 67 for hosting us, and especially Marc. Thank you. Marc is always on a plane somewhere, or he's always going to be very busy between Portugal and South Africa and England from time to time when Liverpool are playing at home, and for tastings like this. So Marc, thank you for your sense of humour, for your knowledge, and for your brilliance, really, and everything you've done for South Africa. I think Marc has been such a key figure for all the reasons we've heard, really, since he got that first job in 1994. So we're glad that Tim Rance gave you a job. Right? Thanks, everybody, and safe home and all that. See you soon.
Thank you.
Well done. Thank you.